Think fast. What do all these people have in common? Give up? They're all part of the executive branch of government, the branch that carries out our country's laws. And they all have the same boss.
I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Give me liberty or give me death.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
You know, America is a big country, made up of the most diverse group of people on Earth. And yet every 4 years, we manage to elect one person to represent our whole nation, the President.
The responsibilities of the President are phenomenal, ranging from formulating foreign policy to making sure our air and water are clean.
Whoa, it sounds like the President does everything. But actually, he or she is only the head of one part of our government. And of course, you know what that part is.
The President is responsible for managing the executive branch of the government.
And he is in charge of enforcing the laws.
The executive branch is led by the President. Along with the legislative branch and the judicial branch, it's one of the 3 branches established by the U.S. Constitution. Though the 3 branches are mostly separate, they also share power. Each branch oversees certain aspects of the other 2, creating a system of checks and balances.
This system keeps one branch from ever gaining too much power.
The legislative branch includes Congress, the body of lawmakers that make our country's laws. The judicial branch is our court system, which interprets the laws.
And the executive branch makes sure those laws are carried out or executed under the leadership of the chief executive, the President.
It was settled by the Constitution, the laws, and the whole practice of the government that the entire executive power is vested in the President of the United States.
Fortunately, the chief executive gets a lot of help with the job. Throughout every state and around the world, there are millions of people working for the executive branch.
It's hard to believe one branch of government could do so much. How does the President handle it all?
I not only use all the brains that I have, but all that I can borrow.
Some of the sharpest brains the President borrows are in the cabinet.
The cabinet is not a formal body of government like in a parliamentary system, but rather an informal advisory group to the President, offering advice and counsel that he may or may not accept.
The cabinet is made up of the administrative heads of the executive departments. The members of the cabinet are known as secretaries. Though they're selected by the President, they have to be approved by the Senate.
This approval process is a check on the executive branch by the legislative branch, and it goes for judges and other high officials too.
Even though there's no mention of the cabinet in the Constitution, it's been part of the executive branch since the days of George Washington's presidency.
His cabinet included notables like Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State and Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury.
Secretaries don't have to agree with each other. As advocates for their individual departments, they often have contradictory viewpoints. From agriculture to Veterans Affairs, these departments represent many of the most pressing responsibilities of the executive branch, like housing and urban development.
It directs a massive health and welfare system and promotes cutting-edge scientific discovery through organizations like the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, and the National Institutes of Health.
Or the Justice Department, which is headed up by the Attorney General.
As the nation's top legal eagle, the Attorney General serves as the President's main advisor on the law. At the same time, he or she keeps an eye on over 100,000 employees. Federal investigators, Border Patrol agents, correction officers, and federal prosecutors all ultimately report to the AG.
The Attorney General also has a strong voice in the selection of federal judges, including the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court of our land.
Do you know what the other heads of executive departments do? Say, the Secretary of the Interior?
I don't really know. He is the head of the different departments within the executive?
The Secretary of the Interior is not a home decorations expert.
He or she manages more than 500 million acres of public lands. Should we drill for oil in Alaska? Should cows graze on federal property? These are the sort of questions the Secretary of the Interior must address.
And the Secretary of State is not some kind of super typist.
He or she is our chief spokesperson to other countries. As the head of the State Department, this secretary advises the President on foreign policy, treaties, and negotiations.
When it comes to cabinet meetings, the key word is advise. The President doesn't always have to follow that advice. There's a famous story about Abraham Lincoln consulting his cabinet, which only consisted of 7 people back then. They didn't like a certain plan he was proposing and told him so. At the end of the discussion, Lincoln said, "So there are 7 nays and 1 aye. The ayes have it."
As Harry Truman said of the presidency, the buck stops here. No matter how many truly great minds a president is surrounded by, in the end, all the actions of the executive branch will be credited to or blamed on the President of the United States.
I take full responsibility for my own actions and for those of my administration.
Talk about taking your work home with you. The President does it all, right here at the White House.
The West Wing houses the Oval Office as well as the offices of the President's most trusted personal and political staff. At its center is the White House Chief of Staff, who controls access to the President.
All information flowing in and out of the Oval Office, all appointments to meet with the President, even the speeches the President is to make, go through the White House Chief of Staff.
Leon Panetta, who served in the position under President Clinton, compared it to being on a battlefield because he said, "You must keep your forces focused on the primary mission and not be diverted by incoming fire."
Incoming! In the Office of Management and Budget, the more than $2 trillion annual federal budget is being prepared.
The federal budget is a plan for how our tax dollars are spent and collected.
At more than 250 pages long, the federal budget is a sure cure for insomnia. No thanks. I think I'll wait for the movie to come out.
The presentation may be dull, but the contents are riveting. How well a program is funded is a reflection of how important it is to the current administration.
The budget process has broken down. It needs a drastic overhaul.
Some of the other agencies within the executive office include the Council on Environmental Quality.
It makes sure other executive agencies follow our environmental laws and the President's environmental policies.
And the Office of Policy Development, which advises the President on domestic policy.
You know, all that stuff like healthcare and the economy that affects us here at home.
But one agency in the executive office is more concerned about what's happening beyond our borders.
The National Security Council. Started in 1947, the NSC was the brainchild of President Harry Truman. The Missouri farmer and World War I vet became president when Franklin Delano Roosevelt died early in his 4th term.
April 1945. World War II rages on. Though Truman has been left out of the loop as vice president, it is now up to him to direct the last days of the war. On his watch, the Allies finally triumph in Europe. Truman is also faced with the difficult decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan.
Can you imagine having to take command just like that? No wonder one of Truman's first actions after the war was to create the National Security Council.
Its key members are the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of Defense, and its mission is to help the President coordinate military and diplomatic commitments. With the aid of the NSC, Truman piloted America through the early years of the Cold War with the communist dictatorship of the Soviet Union.
Outspoken and rough-edged, Truman was not always a popular president, yet many Americans appreciated his forthrightness. "Give him hell, Harry," his admirers often cheered. Yet he himself once wrote, "I never did give anybody hell. I just told the truth." And they thought it was hell. Harry Truman, an American original. The National Security Council was set up through a huge piece of legislation that also created the Secretary of Defense, our current military establishment, and one of the most shadowy agencies, the Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA.
In a changing world, gathering intelligence is essential to the security of the U.S. The CIA is but one of the executive branch's many independent agencies. Others include the Environmental Protection Agency and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
We've talked a lot about the President's role as Chief Executive, but that's just one aspect of the job.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
As Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the President directs the military, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, and related wartime actions. During times of war, these powers expand. In World War II, the Congress even allowed the President to impose domestic food and gas rationing and price and wage controls.
Our most successful presidents have been defined more by the times than by their personal characteristics. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt all correctly perceived what was needed in the country in a time of crisis and responded with courage and wisdom and determination to see it through.
According to the U.S. Constitution, only Congress can declare war. But that hasn't stopped many commanders-in-chief from waging undeclared wars. In 1991, President George Bush ordered troops into Kuwait and Iraq, and President Bill Clinton sent the military to the Balkans twice in 1995 and 1999.
And in 2001, President George W. Bush ordered troops to Afghanistan.
Tonight, a few miles from the damaged Pentagon, I have a message for our military. Be ready. I've called the armed forces to alert, and there is a reason. The hour is coming when America will act, and you will make us proud.
The President leads by persuasion, a powerful tool in the hands of a charismatic leader. No other position in government has a greater ability to sway both public opinion and legislators.
I urge every American to join in this effort to bring justice and hope to all our people and to bring peace to our land.
With his Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson took the civil rights movement to a new level.
When a president proposes an idea for legislation, it doesn't mean Congress is obliged to enact it, for only Congress can make laws.
But it works both ways. If the president doesn't like the legislation Congress drafts, he or she can always veto or reject it.
Congress shouldn't send another one of these. And if you do, I will not sign it.
Just another example of our government's system of checks and balances.
Other hats worn by the President include Chief of State. In this role, the President symbolically represents the entire nation at all sorts of affairs of state.
And as our chief diplomat, the President sets the tone and substance for foreign policy. In fact, he or she has the sole power to make treaties.
With the approval of the Senate. but the chief diplomat's circle of influence extends far beyond our shores. American presidents have long acted as mediators between opposing factions in troubled regions, like the Middle East.
Because when the President of the United States talks, the whole world listens.
If you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
American presidents mediate problems of other countries partly out of a desire to create a peaceful international environment which will increase our national security.
The president isn't just the leader of the United States. He or she is also the leader of a specific political party.
That's why you see the president out hitting the campaign trail for other members of the party.
Chief of party, chief of state, commander-in-chief. What kind of chief do you want to be today?
There is one role the president must put above all the others: the guardian of the U.S. Constitution and all U.S. laws. A ceremony called the inauguration marks the beginning of every president's term. In it, the president makes a short but very serious promise known as the Oath of Office.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
And will to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Mostly, the president preserves and protects the Constitution through the various executive law enforcement agencies. But sometimes presidents slip up in their commitment to the oath of office. What happens then?
According to the Constitution, when a president is suspected of committing high crimes and misdemeanors, he or she may be impeached, which means formally charged by the House of Representatives. The case is then tried by the Senate, with the Chief Justice of the United States presiding. If the allegations prove true and the Senate convicts the president, he or she is removed from office.
The impeachment of the president is a remedy of last resort. It is the most solemn act of our entire constitutional process.
Impeachment is an important check on executive power by the legislative branch of government.
Whoa! Presidential impeachment doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's pretty messy. The 1998 impeachment of Bill Clinton tied up the federal government for months. In the end, Clinton was acquitted and served out his term. But when Richard Nixon faced impeachment in 1972,
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
He decided to skip the trial and resign, the only president in U.S. history to do so. Help wanted. Perfect politician for toughest job in the world. All flaws in your character will be exposed, and Congress reserves the right to fire you in a very public way. Man, that's rough.
Still, most presidents remain in office for their full term, which is 4 years. Many even serve 2 terms, the maximum allowed by the Constitution. And it's possible to hold the job more than 8 years. If a president is unable to complete the term, the vice president can finish it and then go on to win 2 more terms. The longest anyone can legally serve is 10 years.
Now you're probably wondering how you can apply for this one-of-a-kind, unique job opportunity. Simple. You just have to be born here in America, or have at least one parent who's an American citizen. Be at least 35 years old, have lived in the United States for at least 14 years, and then, of course, you have to get elected. But perhaps you'd like to start smaller, say the vice president.
I proudly accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
The job qualifications are the same, but the responsibilities are a tad lighter.
The only duty specifically assigned to the vice president by the Constitution is to preside over the Senate.
Most vice presidents bow out of this particular chore, except on special occasions. After all, you don't even get to vote unless there's a tie.
Until the 1960s, the VP didn't even have an office in the White House. But in the 70s, Jimmy Carter began to build up the prestige of the office. He made his Vice President, Walter Mondale, a key consultant in his administration. Since then, many vice presidents have served as vital sounding boards, emissaries, and liaisons for their bosses. The job description may be vague, but few positions are as important. For the vice president is only a heartbeat away from the presidency. Should the president be unable to serve out his term for any reason, his second in command needs to be ready to step in.
A large number of vice presidents have moved up to the presidency either because of the death or disability of the president or because they successfully ran to succeed him. That means increasingly as a people we expect our vice presidents to be of a caliber sufficient to assume the responsibilities of the presidency.
Days after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson told Congress that he would gladly have given all he had, not to be standing before them as president.
So, where do the president and the vice president get their power from? Us. 'Cause we, the people, voted for them.
Future voters! When you pull the voting machine lever, you are selecting who you want to be president. Your vote, in addition to the votes of all the other citizens in the nation, is called the popular vote. Election over, right? Wrong. The popular vote by itself does not elect the president. The Constitution states that we, the people, don't directly elect a president. Your vote actually serves to select electors, people who will represent you in the Electoral College. These electors then cast their votes to elect the president.
What on earth is the Electoral College?
Members of the Senate or House who ultimately will elect the President of the United States.
Actually, the Electoral College is more a state of mind than a place or an institution. Every 4 years in December, after the popular election, the electors of each state get together, cast their votes, and mail them to Washington. Then early in January, Congress meets to read the results.
Seems kind of screwy, but it's part of what is known as representative democracy. We elect a small group of people to represent us.
Every state gets the same number of electors as they have members of Congress. So a sparsely populated state, like Alaska, gets 3 electors, 1 for its single member of the House of Representatives and 2 for the senators. And a very populated state like California gets over 50 electors, reflecting the generous size of its House delegation plus its 2 senators.
Check this out. All but 2 states have a winner-takes-all rule. So even if a candidate only wins by a few popular votes, he or she gets all of that state's electoral votes, and the opponent gets zilch.
Despite those drawbacks, the vast majority of presidential candidates who win the popular vote also win the electoral vote. But not always. 3 times in the 19th century, the Electoral College chose the loser of the popular vote to be the next president. And in the year 2000, history repeated itself. Al Gore won the popular vote, but George W. Bush won the Electoral College and the election.
You know what was most surprising about the 2000 election? Even though it was a long, drawn-out battle, in the press and in the courts, a president was elected according to the rules.
There was no popular uprising after the disputed election of 2000. Strong partisan feelings, bitterness, but in the end, as a people, we accepted the outcome. The Constitution stood firm, and we got on with the business of government.
Both sides realized in the end that for the sake of the nation, it was best to let the reins of government be passed from one administration to the next in an orderly fashion.
Because while the executive branch is defined by the president, it is much, much bigger than one person. It's the mover and shaker of U.S. government, the branch that gets things done.